everybody, and welcome to a very special season wrap up for our 11th season of Yeah, We Read It. My name's Laura. I'm one of the hosts.
My name is Meggie, and I'm the other host.
And we have a very special guest joining us today. The writer of this entire season, Karen M McManus, is joining us. Hi, Karen. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing very good. I'm very excited that you're here. I know Meggie is also very excited that you're here.
Oh, yeah, so excited. I mean, like Laura said earlier, we've loved your books. I've
Yeah.
told a couple of friends too that you were going to be on. It was so funny. I ran into one last week and I was like, "We're doing this series." And she was like, "Is that the one with the peanut allergy?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, it is the series that we're doing." So, really
That's
excited to
the
have
one.
you here. We're big
Yeah.
fans.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. So I guess Meg, do you want to kick things off or should I kick things off?
Yeah, so we're obviously here today talking about your One of Us is Lying series. We've been covering it the whole season, and I think we just kind of wanted to know first off, like, where did you come up with the idea for the now trilogy?
Yeah, so this was back in 2015, and I think I know the exact date because I tweeted about it. I think it was September 15th, but I was driving to work
Mm.
and I was listening to the radio. And at the time, I was a querying author, and I had just started querying a second book, which was going to go nowhere. So I was kind of looking for something new to write. And the theme song from the Breakfast Club came on.
Yeah.
And I'm an 80s kid. I love that song. I turned it up and I started thinking about how that narrative construct of bringing people together who seem like they have nothing in common, but once they interact, they realize they're not so different after all. That's just evergreen. And I thought it could be fun to do a little bit of an uptape, but with a dark twist. And the phrase, the Breakfast Club with murder, popped into my head. And I'm driving along and thinking, okay, but how would you kill someone in detention and not have anyone know that you did it? And I thought of a way. And then I thought, okay, but why would you do it?
Mm.
And that's when the characters started to come to me. And at that point, I park, I go into my office, I work all day long. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about these characters and I'm starting to name them and I'm starting to outline in my head. So by the time I got home, I was ready to start writing.
Awesome. I love that so much. Yeah, no, the first thing I think I noticed is when I opened up like the first page of the book, it was like Bronwyn's the brains and Addie's the beauty. And I was like, this does have a very Breakfast Club vibe to
Mhm.
it. So that's awesome that that's kind of what inspired you. Um,
Yeah.
and even getting back a little bit, I know you said you were, when you came up with the idea, you had just queried a book and you were working on a second one. So I'd love to hear more about how you got into writing, and did you always know you wanted to write YA, or were you kind of forging a different path?
Yeah, it's a long tale. I'll just give you the highlights. I did always wanna write.
Yeah.
That was the first thing I can ever remember wanting to be. When I was 8 years old, I wrote my first story, and I told everyone, "I'm gonna be an author. That's what I'm gonna be." But I didn't get a lot of support to do that. Most people told me it wasn't a practical idea, I would never make any money.
Mm.
And also, as I got older and tried to write more complicated things, it got hard, and I
Mhm.
didn't know how to make it not hard. And I just figured, everyone's right. This is not for me. I'm not going to do it. And I went to college for something else, and I had different kind of jobs, and I just did lots of things. And honestly, almost never thought about writing. And this is like, the sad portion of the story. When my son was 3, my husband passed away, and he was very young. And of course, that's a very devastating thing. And one of the things I thought about a lot was all the things that he didn't get to do. And so I thought, like,
Mm.
well, what are things that I always wanted to do and didn't do? I should probably do them. And I thought, well, I wanted to write a book. But at that point, like, I was not writing a book. I could barely get out of bed.
Yeah.
So I was just like, yeah, sure, I'll write a book someday. And then it was probably a good 5 years later, just a different place, a better
Mhm.
place mentally. I was
Mm.
on a business trip and I was in an airport and I wanted to get something to read. And I picked up The Hunger Games. So I had sort of heard about it, but I didn't really know what
Mhm.
it was. And I got obsessed on that plane ride and I was inspired for the
Mhm.
first time in a long time to try writing something, and I got an idea. It was a very, in retrospect, bad dystopian knockoff of the Hunger Games. But the important thing is it did make me write again, for the first time since I was a teenager myself. So I wrote that book, queried it because I didn't know how bad it was, learned a lot through that process, wrote a second book that was better, but not quite good enough. And then I got the idea for One of Us is Lying. And the nice thing was, this was a good idea. And I'm glad I didn't get it first because I would not have had the skills to execute it.
It's a really good, like, mature way of looking at the writing process too. Because I think a lot of writers, like myself included, you want that big good thing first. And sometimes you have to go through the mud to like get to, the diamond in the rough. And I did see in another interview that you did say you were kind of writing these books amiss not only in lieu of like your husband passing, but you had two other jobs too. I think it was copywriting and something else.
I was a director of marketing.
Wow.
So I did that full time, and it was a really intense job because I was managing an international team, and there were
Yeah.
people in Europe and people in Asia and people on the West Coast and people on the East Coast. So it was just like meetings all the time.
Yeah.
And then of course I'm a single mom, so my son was pretty young at the time when I started writing. He was about 8. So I'm managing his life and all his sports and making sure he's fed. And so I could never really write anything until about 9 or 10 o'clock at night, usually. And then I would write till like 12 or 1, and I would go to bed, and I would get up at 6:30 and I do it all over again. So I just really did not sleep hardly at all from about like 2015 through probably 2018 when I finally left my day job.
Wow.
Yeah, that is dedication and such a grind. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. How did you like manage doing that? Was it just like a compulsion to the point of like you were like, I have to write, I have to get it out? That made
Yeah, I
you
mean, that was it. It was fun, even though it was really hard work. I really loved doing it. And, it's funny because obviously when we start out, nobody is paying us to do this. And we
Yeah.
have no idea if anyone's ever going to pay us to do it. You're doing it because you love it and it's fun. And I had found a great community of fellow writers, and I knew I was getting better. My craft was improving. I was understanding the industry more. I was better able to execute. And so I could feel progress, even though it wasn't, progress anyone else could see. I thought, okay, this is definitely advancing. So I do feel motivated, even though nothing's really happening professionally for me yet.
Yeah, I love that. That's like, I think that's such a good lesson to like the creative process in whatever vein you're looking at it, because I feel like it can get so easy to be like, this is too hard, this isn't going as fast as I want it to. So to have that sort of patience and finding the motivation where you can is such a good, I think, lesson to any creative that is out there. So I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah. And I think like for me, maybe because I started later in life and I'd done lots of other jobs. But I had a pretty thick skin about my work. And when I realized it wasn't working, I'm just like, you know what? You're going on the shelf. I'm not going to spend any more time with you. And I remember listening to this agent one time who was talking about like, here's why, you're not getting query responses. And I was like, not getting any. So I thought, okay, I'm going to find out how to make my query better. And she said, maybe you need to write a better book. And I was like, oh, what? No, this is the best I can do. But then I thought about it and I was like, no, she's right. This book is not good enough. And that was the moment I just decided I was done with that first book and I was going to move on. So it's like a little bit of a ruthlessness, with your own work. It's like, I'm not overly attached to this. If it's not going anywhere, I'm going to move on.
Yeah.
Because like I think you get to a point too where you start self-editing so much that it's like a snake eating its own tail, and you're like, I just want it out of my head.
And you don't know, like, am I making this better or am I just making it different? That's the hardest part when you don't have someone to guide you.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you spend so much time on something, you can get to a point where hearing any sort of critique can just be like but I put so much work into it. What do you mean it's not good enough? And then to have that ability to step away and be like, maybe it isn't that good. Maybe this is just like a fun thing for me to do is really important. It's a really important skill to be able to have that, like, okay, outside perspective of this.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it definitely helps. It made things move along more quickly than they would have if I'd kept trying to make it work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a good thing you went through the whole process because now we have the One of Us is Lying series, which, I mean, you do a really good job of being
Yeah.
very concise and interweaving a lot of different point of views together in the first book, and then you add more characters in the second, and then they all kind of come together in the third. And so, I guess, when did you decide you wanted to focus on more than one character, and how did you kind of manage to flesh them out into having their own little niches?
It was always gonna be 4 characters. That was
Mhm.
the idea I had, and I very much wanted to stick with that, archetype, but let's peel the layers and see what they're really like as the mystery unfolds. So, I always knew it was gonna be 4. I always knew they were gonna, on the surface, appear to be certain types.
Mhm.
Um, but beyond that, I spent a lot of time initially on their voices, trying to make
Mhm.
them distinct, because when I started sharing like really early pages with some of my critique partners, almost uniformly everybody told me this is confusing, pick one character and write from their
Mhm.
perspective. And I was like,
Mhm.
well, I don't want to do that. That's my vision for the story is all
Yeah.
four. But I understand what you're telling me is that the voices are not distinct enough. So that's what I'm going to work on. So I spent a lot
Yeah.
of time with like
Mhm.
character worksheets, and I would do like interviewing them, and I would try and think of every little detail about them, and then I would write like little sections in all the 4 different voices and try to think about how is this different when Addie says it? How is it different when Cooper says it? And then I made playlists for all of them with like very different music that kind of represented them in my mind, and that's what I would listen to when I read them. And so eventually I think I did get to the point where they felt distinct enough from each other that it was no longer hard to follow them, or at
Yeah.
least if it was a little hard in the beginning, you were invested enough that you would keep going.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
no, something Maggie and I talk a lot about on the podcast is not only were in the first book, the first 4 characters written so in a way that it just made easy to follow because they all had such distinct voices. But then it got even more impressive when we shift gears to add 3 more perspectives in
Yeah,
the third
why
book.
not?
So I know now we have 7 main characters that like are all very distinct and unique individuals. Um, but when you even get to the third book, now you're juggling between kind of managing the relationships and dynamic between all 7 of these main characters. So I guess how did you focus on managing to give everybody enough focus, and to make both yourself and the audience feel like you were doing good by everyone to give everybody a little spotlight moment here and there?
That was I felt like that was the biggest challenge in One of Us
Yeah.
is Back, because the cast got so big. And first of all, you can't have everyone come back as a point of view character. And I
Yeah.
Mhm.
knew somebody was going to be disappointed that their favorite wasn't there, and,
Mhm.
and I'm a little disappointed that I couldn't write from everyone's perspective, but it wouldn't have worked. And
Mhm.
so I really tried to focus on who has the biggest stakes in this
Yeah.
story. And for that,
Mhm.
it was definitely Phoebe, because I left
Mhm.
her on a cliffhanger the previous book. It was definitely Addie because spoiler, in terms of
Yeah.
anyways, yeah, I
Yes.
won't spoil it. But it's definitely Addie.
Yeah.
And then with Nate, I just felt like he had the furthest still to go on his character journey. Like he'd come
Mhm.
so far, but when I left him and One of Us is Lying, he was probably the least far along in
Mhm.
terms of figuring out his life,
Yeah.
just because he had so much going on. So I felt like there was a lot more that I could do with him.
Mhm.
So I set those 3, but then I thought, well, God, I gotta obviously have plenty of Bronwyn, because everybody needs Bronwyn and Nate, and I've
Yeah.
gotta have Maeve because she's everyone's favorite little sleuth, and we gotta make sure that Cooper and Chris get some time, and we get updates on what Cooper's doing in baseball. And
Mhm.
I left Knox and Phoebe kind of uncertain. I gotta work them in. Oh, and by the way, Chris and Luis are here, and we should make sure that they have something to do. So it was challenging, and it wasn't well balanced initially in my outline, and I had to kind of go back and figure out like who's getting a short shrift here, and how can I give them more to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. If
Is there
you could, oh, sorry,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead, Meg.
No, you go. I was
I
going to
was gonna
say,
say because off of that is that if you could have put like a fourth point of view in the third book, is that the question you were gonna ask,
yeah,
Meg?
exactly.
Who would you have picked if you were like, okay, just by my standards of who you love writing as or writing for, who would you have put in that fourth book?
Probably either Bronwyn or Maeve. It
Yeah.
doesn't 100%. I was like, is it really a One of Us book without a Rojas point of view? I don't know. That there does something that feels like a little bit wrong about that.
Mhm.
So I would have added, I think, one of those two in. I actually think it worked fine without them because, again, like stakes wise, they were kind of in good places, and I
Yeah.
wasn't ready to put Maeve like through her paces again. She just been through the ringer,
Yeah.
and one of us is next, and she was kind of like resolved. And Bronwyn too, she's kind of like on her path. She knows what she wants. There's less internal
Mhm.
conflict for her than with Nate.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with the three you picked in the third book. I just actually finished it today on my lunch break, and I was like, this was a great choice. I will personally say.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad it worked for you.
Yeah, it moved really well, and I
Yeah,
mean, the twists in the end, I feel like once you always get to there, you've built up the world so well that it just makes the, like, last 50 pages, you
just
go
fly.
through it so fast, and then you're like,
Yeah,
"More. I
more.
need more." So I guess piggybacking off of, like, the last question then, what were some of the characters that you found you either loved writing or were really difficult for you to write when you started conceiving this idea?
Nobody was hard to write. That was the great thing about returning to this world is that I know them so well that
Mhm,
everybody flowed really easily.
mhm.
Um, there were some people who surprised me. I had a ton of fun writing the side character of Vanessa, who plays a bigger role in this
Yeah.
book than, she wasn't present at all in One of Us is Next. And I had
Mhm.
wanted to bring her back. I had a role for her then. And then I ended up cutting it because it didn't work.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But in this book, I feel like she worked and she was a lot of fun to write. So I really enjoyed getting to know her a little bit better.
Mhm.
And I really, really loved writing Addie. I think
Mhm.
Addie's always going to have just such
Yeah.
a special place in my heart. Like her character and her arc and her journey are so important to me. And I know they're
Mhm.
really important to readers also. So to give her, again, no spoilers, but I really like how her story concluded for now.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Mhm.
was, to me, that felt like really good and right. And I was glad to be able to put her in that place because she's been through a lot, and
Yeah.
she goes through a lot in this book.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think Maggie and I talk about this a lot. I think we both really, really just like love Addie as a character because it's just such a good just shift and growth over time. Um,
Mhm.
Continuing on the topic of writing, I want to talk about your best practice for writing a mystery. Did you start from the end, like most people say you should write mysteries of like this is the answer and then work backwards? Or did you kind of try to just start the story and see where it took you?
With this story, it was really interesting and it was unusual because the whole genesis for this story, when people kept asking me, "Will I write a third?" and I was like, "Nah, I'm done." And then I thought about it some more. I was like, "Well, maybe I'm not done." Um, and there was a plot thread that I had to cut out of One of Us is Lying
Mhm.
because it was very distracting to the main plot. And it
Hmm.
had to do with explaining the motivations and the backstory of the antagonist.
Mm.
And so I thought this was vital to the story and I must have it, but it completely sucked the energy away from the main story in a very
Mhm.
bad way. And so my agent said, "Well, you should cut it out and just make sure that you make this person into the kind of person who would do this. And then you don't have
Mhm.
to have all the other stuff." And I think that worked really well. But in my mind, there was always more to the story. Like it was always part of the Bayview
Yeah.
DNA.
Mhm.
And so I started thinking, well, is there a story there? Could that sustain a book? I don't know, maybe. So I started brainstorming around that. Like, what would that mystery be if I pull out that little thread and try to weave it into something bigger? What does that look like? And so it was a lot of like brainstorming and outlining and stress testing with my agent. Like, is this enough? Is this a full story?
Yeah.
Before we got to the point where we thought, yeah, we think we could make a book out of this. So
Yeah.
that's different than
Mhm.
what I typically do is like, I get some, what I would call like a big idea. It's like a hooky idea, like the
Mhm.
Breakfast Club with murder, but I don't know what it means. And then I start thinking, okay, well, who's in the room? Who would be involved in something like this? And I start thinking about characters. And then I drill down into what the actual plot is.
Mhm.
So it's
Mhm.
like hook, character, plot is how I
Mhm.
typically do it.
Yeah. Very
Yeah.
cool.
I really like that. And I feel like
Yeah.
too with like murder mystery, there's so many different paths
Yeah.
that it can take. Do you think you like ever wrote yourself into kind of a situation in the story that you weren't really quite sure what would come next or like how to get yourself out of the problem?
I did that constantly with my second book, Two Can Keep a Secret, which I ended up rewriting 3 times
Oh,
because I
wow.
just yeah, I didn't know at the time, honestly, like, how to write a murder mystery. Like, One of Us Is Lying was a bolt of lightning, just came to me all at once, super fast, got it down, and
Mhm.
it did really well, and I thought, "Look at me, I'm so good at books." But the reality was it was a different kind of book. It was like a little kernel, it needed like sun and light and time. And I didn't give it that because I was trying to like shove it into the same pipeline as One of Us Is Lying, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
So that changed my process forever because I battled that book alone, feeling like I had to figure it out. I did not ask for help with my agent, my editor. I did eventually, but not soon enough. Not before I had already written it twice, and it was terrible.
Mhm.
So then I got some help to like step back and let's do an outline. What a novel thought! Why don't we try that and see if it helps? And it helps so much. So
Yeah.
now I always outline. I always like get really, really detailed about how people get into situations, how did they get out of the situations.
Mhm.
Even though a lot of that does change, I need to be sure that I understand how I'm going to move the chess pieces around the board.
Yeah.
Well, I think too, your second book, when I was looking it up, it came out in like t- 2020, and then the new one came out in 2023, and we were in lockdown. So I'm sure a lot of like writing your book
Yeah.
was kind of alone, and maybe it was like hard at points to like get yourself out of your head. Was it kind of cathartic, like to spend a little bit of the pandemic, like writing these books and like especially your third one that's coming out?
Yeah, it was really nice to go back to the world
Mhm.
of Bayview during such a tumultuous time.
Hmm.
I wrote the book pretty much, I think, mostly in 2021.
Mhm.
Hmm.
A lot of it in 2021. Yeah. So it was kind of, during that grind time where we're
Mhm.
all worn down and things are
Yeah.
still very uncertain. And it was very comforting to be in that world with characters I knew very well. And I didn't have to do a lot of the heavy lifting that I do with characters. Because the thing about writing multi POV, right, is like at least 2, maybe 3 times, you gotta come up with stakes and goals and backstories and a meaningful character arc for
Mhm.
multiple people, and I was really drained after doing that for,
Mhm.
kinda like the 4th time in a row with nothing more to tell, and so it was really nice to go back into series mode and, at least have a little familiarity.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you ever like have any strategy for coming up with higher and higher stakes as you went through building this series? Because something else Maggie and I talk about a lot, where it's just like we feel like you are able to just say like, okay, yeah, first one just like school wide murder, second one, now it's a school wide truth or dare game. You're very good at escalating over time and also throughout the book.
Hmm.
So I guess what was the strategy for how do I make this bigger?
I would love to say there was a strategy that makes me sound very smart. There was not. I don't recommend writing a series the way I wrote a series, which is as a bunch of standalones, and
Yeah.
then never actually being ready to write the next book because you write yourself into corners sometimes and you're like, well, now what? I said they're going to be here and they can't be there.
Yeah,
So
you're
I
like,
have to
there was
change
a
it.
bomb. What next? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I did not, do nearly as much planning in terms of how the books could connect as I would have and how they would build on each other as I would have if I had conceived of this as a trilogy from the start. But having said that, I do feel like the books work as a whole. And at least with the last one, I was able to kind of go back to okay, well, I already did this. I already did this. Like for this one, clearly we got to bring everyone together. That's already going to feel bigger.
Mhm.
That's already going to feel, I think, like a little bit higher stakes, and that
Mhm.
we've come to really know and love all of these characters. And essentially, they're all kind of imperiled in different ways in this book.
Mhm.
You obviously, since it being a murder mystery book, have a lot of plot twists and loopholes that made us gasp when we were reading it. Was there ever like a plot twist that when it came to you, you were like, oh my goodness, and you got so excited writing about?
Yeah. It was the very last one.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
not my original outline. And then
Oh,
I was
wow.
writing it and I was like, "Ooh, you know what would make this like a million times worse is if I did X." And that's always the greatest feeling when
Yeah.
you realize you're just gonna be more evil and you know, hopefully more surprising
Yeah.
than you originally intended.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
we
yeah.
were definitely sending
Or
texts back and
the
forth
third book
about it.
finale is like the yeah, like firework finale of like a series where I was like, I
Yeah.
had no idea what was going to happen. And when I got there, I was like, well, gotta finish this immediately. Like I have to know how this
Yeah.
ends.
And
Yeah.
again, like, you know, this was something that was in my mind back in 2015, but
Yeah.
not that last bit. Like I did not go there. I
Wow.
ended it at the moment before that, you know, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a new little twist that got added on in 2021. And,
Yeah.
you know, I think it really worked.
Yeah, no, it's so cool to think that it's like, great, this was a part of your like initial draft and it just didn't make sense there, but in the world of like a another book, it finally makes sense in the circumstance that you put it in. So it's kind of cool that like you did get a payoff from all the work that you put in initially to that ultimate twist in the third book.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
goes to show like nothing's wasted, you know, which
Yeah.
is really nice.
Yeah.
Um, Something I wanted to ask is because I am such a firm believer that in any type of media, it is so hard to write or put technology in as a factor because oftentimes in books or in TV shows, it just becomes just like a weird thing on the screen or just feels like it was included because it's of the times. And I feel like a lot of times now we see something in it's post apocalypse or it's in the 90s because there's not really cell phones, but you
Right.
really, really well included technology as like a way to drive the plot forward, whether it was the Tumblr or like the mass group chat or the Instagrams and the TikToks or the digital billboard. That's another piece of technology. Did you ever like grapple with even making that decision that technology was going to help the story rather than hinder it? Or were you on the fence about including it? Or were you just like, it's of the time, I have to include it?
Yeah, I did worry initially because, you know, I was just sort of doing lots of research about writing contemporary and reading a lot and
Mhm.
hearing from people who said, well, I don't put technology in my books because it's going to date them. And
Yeah.
I was like, well, that makes sense. I understand that. But also, I feel like I need it. And I think it's okay for a book to be of its moment, you know?
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. So I sort of made the decision that if I use Tumblr in 2015 and nobody uses it in 2025, I am okay with that. That's fine. And also, you know, I'm trying to reflect the lives of my readers, and I know how plugged in they are. You know, I know
Mhm.
what they use. I talk to family members and the kids in my neighborhood all the time. So it just felt like I wasn't going to be reflecting their world as accurately as I could if I
Yeah.
didn't,
Mm.
you know, try to make it a big part of the stories. But also there's that fine line where you want to reflect the kids experience, but knowing that half your audience is adults, like you don't want to you know, confuse them, people who might never use Snapchat, or you know,
Yeah.
just trying not to go too far into the weeds with something, so that you know your audience kind of generally understands where you're going with this, but they don't necessarily have to know the like nitty gritty of all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I feel like obviously you have like a timestamp on it in the sense of like there's the Bayview 2020 username. You use TikTok, which is like undeniably of its time. And I think that that's like one of the things I really appreciated with your writing is like how you wrote teenagers in an incredibly adult way, but it never felt like it's like pandering. Obviously, we read a lot of the young adult novels,
Mhm.
and like we can tell when it is an adult writing a teenager. And I never like really felt like that with you. Like, mostly I'm thinking of in the second book when Knox's whole secret is like he can't get a boner.
Or
And
not.
it's like,
I can't get it
yeah,
out.
now we're like adults. We're like, that doesn't matter. But in high school, it was like such a life or death situation, especially for like men, if things like
Mhm.
that got out. So how did you kind of manage to write like a teenage lifestyle in a way that didn't feel like someone who was pandering to a young adult audience?
I appreciate that. I'm glad it came across that way. I think I just really do try to respect and meet my audience where they are.
Mhm.
I'm pretty easily able to put myself into my own mindset of what
Mhm.
I was like back then. I don't know. I may have never left that headspace fully, but it's easy for me to slip back into 17-year-old me and think
Mhm.
about the things that I care about, even though I realize now that maybe I didn't need to care quite so much. But that's still something I can access pretty easily. And then I just listen to the kids around me and
Mhm.
surround myself with my audience. I like young adults. I like the kids in my neighborhood who used to help me with my son when he was little. And, I've seen them grown up, and I like talking to them about their dreams and their fears and what they're worried about, what they like. And that time of life is just inherently really interesting to me. And so I just
Yeah.
try to reflect that, the way your emotions are just like really close to the surface and everything matters and a lot of things are new. And that is just going to heighten so much of what you're doing and saying and thinking. And if you couple that, as I try to do, with a high stakes plot, you can just get a lot of emotion and a lot of depth to the characters' feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off of that because in this interview that you gave for a book site, and I don't remember the name, I feel really bad. But you had a quote that I really loved, and it was like how thrillers give teens kind of like a safe space to experience and process the whole world we're living through right
Yeah.
now. And I think it is really scary for them. And I think that it is problems that are so unique to their generation. Um, and I was just kind of like wondering what sort of problems do you think that teenagers face that are wholly unique to their generation? And what problems do you think they face now that are just kind of universal amongst people who go through teendom?
Yeah. Well, I think, when I think of what the young people that, I know and care about are worried about, they are deeply worried about climate change.
Yeah.
They're deeply worried about the political schism we have happening right now in the country. They're worried about people losing rights, which was not something that I worried about as a kid. I thought, kind of naively, we're just constantly making progress and it's getting better and better and better. And that
Mhm.
doesn't seem to be the case lately. So that's weighing on everybody's mind, just the injustice, inequality, unfairness.
Mhm.
And then I think, sort of universally, everybody is grappling with, where's my place in the world?
Mhm.
Like, what do I believe? Do I believe the things I was raised with? Does
Mhm.
that resonate with me? Am I surrounded with good influences, or are, the people that I'm friendly with, maybe they don't support me or
Mhm.
accept me as I am? Is that something I need to change? How do I change it? So those
Yeah.
things don't change.
Yeah.
But kind of the ecosystem that we're in now, I do think it's a really specific moment in time that is scary.
Yeah.
And people ask me sometimes, like, well, writing, murder for teens or dark books for teens, is that too dark? And I just think, I don't know. I think reality is pretty dark.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
I don't write anything graphic. That's not my style.
Mhm.
But I think there's a place for almost every level of literature and young adult,
Mhm.
because people have such vast experiences. And if a kid has gone through something, they deserve to see that on the page.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
do think it gives kids a safe space to kind of experience this fear and this tension and process it, like, at their own pace.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And like, I mean, I think there are those moments that, it's a fun book to get like really wrapped up in. And then there's ones that like really resonate
Yeah.
with people who have like struggles of like, controlling first boyfriends as a thing. And I
Yeah.
also think, oh, how you handled like Cooper and like being outed as like a gay person.
Mhm.
I thought that was such a palpable fear that you can have at like any age of like
Yeah.
my parents have an image of me. Maybe I don't live up to it.
Yeah.
So I feel like I mean it's definitely like stories that can last and span at any point in
Mhm.
time.
Definitely.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. I want to tap back in because we were talking about, we have an audience of young readers and adult readers. So I want to hear a little bit about your point of view of what was it like when you found out One of Us is Lying was being adapted into a television show?
Yeah.
Well, that actually happened before. Well, it started before it came out.
Oh,
So,
really?
yeah, my agent, unbeknownst to me, because she, didn't want to like get my hopes up, but she passed the book along to a film agent who she works with, and because she felt like it had film potential,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but she didn't know if he was going to feel the same way, and if he did feel the same way, if he was going to be able to, find anyone else who was interested,
Mhm.
because that's sort of how it goes, like a film agent takes it out to
Yeah.
studios and production companies, and they might be like, nah, not interested.
Mhm.
So he did that for a while. And
Mm.
then when he got some interest from a couple of producers, that's when my book agent made the introduction between me and him. I didn't even know I had a film agent at the time. And she's like, surprise, you have a film agent. And also, he has some people who are interested in One of Us is Lying. So I had a conversation with them, and they were not really a production company. They were not a
Mhm.
studio. They were more interested in kind of like putting the deal together type of thing. So I'm like,
Okay.
okay, sure. Um, so they started having some conversations, and then the book came out and it did really well. And all of a sudden, people started contacting me. So Universal actually contacted me,
Mm.
like through my contact form on my website, and so I like passed that along to the people who are already working on this, and ultimately that's sort of how it came about. But I think we announced it in like the fall of 2017, but we'd been
Wow.
talking about it since like early that spring.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
then of course it took 4 years to get to
Yeah, because of
to get to
production
screen, which is not
standpoint,
long
yeah.
in the scheme of things, but as someone who had no prior experience with the process,
Yeah.
I did not know what to expect in that regard.
Wow. Did you ever, when you were writing this, like, even consider it would turn into like something like TV or film, or did you ever envision it like when writing it? You're like, I could see this as a film scene or something.
I mean, I could, I thought it had film potential,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it just, to me, it felt very visual and the characters felt very vivid.
Mhm.
But, I didn't even know if I was going to get an agent. So that definitely
Yeah.
felt like,
Yeah.
like a
You're
very
like, "Let's
far
tackle
away
one thing
dream.
first, and then we can."
Yeah, yeah. Let's see if we can get this thing published first of all. But I did
Mhm.
always think it had potential. And
Mhm.
there was one point after I got my agent and my editor, and I had done a first pass on the editing, and my editor was amazing, and she really helped me tighten up the book a lot. And I was feeling really good about it. And I
Mhm.
said to my sister, I think this could actually be something. Like I think this could really be a thing.
Yeah.
And I don't typically say stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm very much like, hedge your bets, wait and see. But
Yeah.
it really did feel like special to me. And
Mhm.
it's funny, I was reading Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle
Mhm.
Zevin, which is a wonderful book. And it's about game developers.
It's so
And they
good.
develop a book. Yeah,
Yeah.
they develop a game, and at
Yeah.
one point they're like, I think we really did something here. And I was like, oh my, that's, I feel like you kind of know when you
Yeah.
make something that has the potential for a lot of people to love it. It doesn't mean it's going to get in front of the right people. Doesn't mean
Mhm.
your timing is going to be there, but I
Mhm.
did feel like there was something special about it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a good feeling
That is
too.
such a good feeling, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a wonderful feeling, and it's even better when all the chips fall in the right way and
Yeah,
it actually works out.
exactly.
So, based on when this episode is coming out, One of Us is Next just came out. And I was wondering, do you have like any big plans for promoting the book or any like fun news about where you might be promoting it for your fans?
Yeah, so I am going to be on tour for One of Us is Back
Ooh.
starting the night of its release. I'll be in my hometown in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and then I'm kind of heading down the East Coast through July with
Cool.
stops in Rhode Island and Delaware and New York and New Jersey and Florida. And then I'm heading over to the West Coast and doing a couple of events in California and Seattle. Um, Then I'm going home for a little bit. Then I'm going to be at the National Book Fair in Washington, D.C. In sort of mid-August. I think it's the 12th. And then I head to London, and I'm going to spend a week in England doing events with my UK publisher. So I'll be there in mid-August.
Oh
Wow.
my gosh, that's a great next month of planning. That sounds
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah, it's exciting because this
Yeah.
is a big moment wrapping up
Yeah.
this book, and it's nice to know that I'll get a chance to talk to a lot of readers and a lot of fellow authors about it. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious because you said you're going to the UK and you said earlier that in your bookcase you have the international books. How many languages has the series been published in?
42.
Oh wow.
Wow. That's
That's
nuts.
Pretty
that's
exciting.
cool.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
They're organized behind me in alphabetical order by country, so it's at the moment it's
Oh
Albania
cool.
to Vietnam.
Wow.
That's
Oh
so
my goodness.
awesome. Um, well, speaking of, I know this third book, as we have said, ends with a big spoiler, but it also really ends with a very great moment between anyone to kind of tie up some loose ends that might have existed throughout the series. Do you ever think that you might come back to Bayview in a fourth book, or do you think you're gonna be focusing on other things for now?
I wouldn't rule it out. I would say
Yeah,
that Simon's story is done. There's
yeah,
nothing more to say about what started that day in detention. This fully finishes that story. But I could see coming back to these characters at some point. I think of it kind of like, Maureen Johnson's Truly Devious trilogy, where
hmm
she's got the 3 books that are one continuous mystery, but then she's kind of followed the characters with some standalones.
yeah,
I'm not planning it. I don't want to say that. I don't have a story idea. I
yeah,
haven't, made any plans to do that, but I could see it. I would not rule it out
yeah.
Yeah. Are
because they're
you
so fun to write.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
they're
they're fun
fun
to
to
read too,
read.
so
Well, are you taking a break from writing for now just to kind of reap the benefits of having your most recent book published, or is there like anything that you're kind of scheming on or working on in
Yeah.
the meantime?
I'm putting the finishing touches on my 8th book, which is going to be coming out next summer,
Wow.
July, I think, 2024. And that is another standalone mystery, dual points of view. And I don't think I can say much about it yet, but it's going to be, I'm pretty sure we'll start talking about that in the fall.
Cool.
But after that, I don't know. After that, I actually am taking a little breather,
Yeah.
and figure out what's next. It has been a ton of fun churning out 8 books in 8 years, but I
Yeah.
also could use a little downtime.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think you've earned it
Yeah,
definitely by
after
now.
8 years, I agree. You need a little downtime, especially if a lot of them have so many the amount of, mysteries too. I can only
Oh
imagine
yeah.
The mysteries and
what's
the characters, it's
yeah.
like, I don't know, 19 point of view characters or something.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people have been living in my head in the past several
Yeah.
years.
Yeah,
So just trying to clear them out a little bit.
Yeah.
now
Just
you
be
can
Karen for a
spend
little bit.
you can spend 9 to
Yeah.
midnight sleeping and 6 a.m. sleeping too instead of writing.
Yeah.
um well, Karen, I think that's every big question we wanted to ask you, but to I guess wrap up this episode, we'd love to know where everybody listening can keep track of you, follow you, and learn what is coming next.
Yeah, so I'm most active on Instagram. I'm writer KMC there. That's the best place to follow me for updates. I do still maintain a presence on Twitter, same name, but I just don't spend very much time there anymore. And I've started to dip into the new threads, but I'm not sure yet if that's gonna stick. So Instagram is the best place.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Well, great. Thank you again so much, Karen. We really appreciate you coming in and talking to us about this entire three book series. We had the best time reading it, so again, we just really appreciate it. It was cool to get to talk to you and learn a little bit more about the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, great talking to you both, and thanks for focusing on the series. It's really
Yeah.
fun. So I'm glad that you've been doing your deep dive, and I'm glad we had a chance to talk at the end of it.
Well,
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you. Meggie, any closing thoughts from you?
Nope. I was just gonna say, if you want to keep up with our deep dives on Karen's One of Us is Lying series, you can find us on Twitter and TikTok at Yaoi Reddit, on Instagram at Meggie_and_Laura. You can also email us at MeggieandLauraPresent@gmail.com.
And
And I think
yes,
that's
you
gonna be it.
can. And that's going to be it for season 11. And we'll, I guess, see you for season 12, which will be coming later this year. Thank you all for listening, and goodbye.